I wasn't dancing for tips. I was dancing to keep someone alive. The lights above me burned white and gold, too bright, too fake, turning sweat into something that looked almost beautiful. The bass thumped through the floor, through my ribs, through the thin heels that were half a size too small. But I kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the rent notice taped to my door and the empty fridge that echoed when I opened it. My name is Lily Bennett, 24, and every night I traded silence for music and exhaustion for survival in a place where nobody asked questions as long as you kept smiling. I counted everything in dollars and hours, in how many plates of food I could afford after a 6-hour shift, in how long I could pretend my legs didn't shake when I stepped off stage. And every night, just past midnight, I walked 3 blocks in the cold to a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and second chances, carrying a paper bag warm against my palms. They were always there, the same booth by the window, an elderly couple sharing 1 cup of coffee like it was enough. He wore the same worn jacket no matter the weather, and she folded her hands like she was trying to hold something together that kept slipping. The first night I paid for their meal, the waitress looked at me like I'd made a mistake, but I just shook my head and said, "Put it on mine," even though my account barely held 3 digits. "You shouldn't do that," the old man told me, his voice gentle but firm, like he was used to being listened to. I smiled anyway, sliding the plate toward them, pretending I hadn't skipped dinner myself. It became a routine I never talked about, not to my coworkers, not to anyone, because kindness feels different when it's quiet, when it doesn't expect anything back. Night after night, I danced, counted my tips, and walked those same 3 blocks, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the kind of cold that stung your lungs, but always with that paper bag in my hands. And they always looked surprised, like they didn't quite believe I'd come back again. "Why do you help us?" the woman asked once, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to read something. I hadn't said. I shrugged, because the truth was too simple and too heavy at the same time. "Because I can," I said, even though it wasn't entirely true. The truth was I knew what it felt like to sit in a room and pretend you weren't hungry, to smile when someone asked if you were okay. The truth was helping them made the world feel less sharp, like maybe not everything had to hurt all the time. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't fit, like the way the old man spoke sometimes, words too precise, too controlled for someone who looked like he had nothing left, or the way the woman watched the door every time it opened, like she was expecting someone important. And once, just once, I noticed a black car parked across the street, engine running, lights off, like it was waiting. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was just tired, just seeing things that weren't there, because the truth was simple, or at least I thought it was. I danced, they ate, and that was enough. Until the night everything changed. The night the music stopped feeling like noise and started feeling like a warning. The night the door of that diner opened and the air shifted in a way I couldn't explain, like the world had been quietly rearranging itself around me the entire time, and I had been too busy surviving to notice. The door opened, and everything inside me went still, not because it was loud, but because it was not. The kind of silence that makes people look up without knowing why. I felt it before I saw him, like the air had shifted, heavier, sharper, as if the room suddenly remembered how small it was. I was standing behind the counter, fingers still wrapped around a warm paper cup, when the bell above the door gave a soft chime that sounded too ordinary for what followed. He stepped in slowly, like he owned the space without needing to prove it. Dark coat, tailored, clean lines that did not belong in a place where the menu was handwritten and the coffee tasted like yesterday. His eyes moved once across the room, not searching, not rushing, just knowing exactly what he would find. And then they landed on the booth by the window. I turned without thinking, already knowing what I would see. The old man sitting a little straighter, the woman's hands tightening together, not in fear, but in something else, something closer to relief. "You are late," the old man said, his voice different now, steadier, carrying weight it had never shown before. The man by the door did not answer right away, just took a few steps forward, measured, controlled, until he stood beside their table. Up close. He looked younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, but there was something in his posture, something in the stillness of his hands, that made him feel older, like time worked differently for him. "Traffic," he said finally, his voice low, even. the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be heard. The woman reached for his hand, and I saw it then. The smallest shift in him, the way his shoulders softened for half a second, like a crack in something otherwise unbreakable. "You should eat," she told him, glancing at the plates in front of them, plates I had paid for, plates that suddenly felt heavier in my chest. His eyes followed hers, down to the food, then to the edge of the table where the receipt still sat, my name scribbled in blue ink. Lily. I felt my heartbeat in my throat as his gaze lifted, slow, deliberate, until it found me across the room. It was not curiosity, it was recognition of something he had not expected to find. I looked away first, because it felt like the safer choice, like stepping back from a line I did not understand. But it was too late. "Who paid for this?" he asked. Not to me, but not really to them either. The old man smiled, a quiet, knowing expression that did not match the man I had met weeks ago. "The girl," he said, nodding slightly in my direction, like he had been waiting for this moment. I wanted to disappear, to become part of the background again, just another face behind the counter. But the room had already shifted, and there was no going back to before. Footsteps crossed the worn tile floor, slow, unhurried, until they stopped in front of me. I could smell something faint, clean, expensive, completely out of place. "You have been taking care of them," he said, not a question. I swallowed, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "I was just helping," I answered, the words feeling smaller than they should have. His eyes did not leave mine, steady, unreadable, like he was measuring something deeper than what I said. Behind him, I saw the old woman watching us, her expression soft, almost proud, like she already knew something I did not. The man's gaze shifted briefly, just enough to acknowledge them, before returning to me. "Do you know who they are?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, because the truth was I had never needed to know. They were just two people who needed help, and that had been enough. For a moment, he said nothing, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between all of us, something that made the air feel different, charged in a way I could not explain. Then he reached into his coat, not quickly, not threatening, just deliberate, and placed something on the counter in front of me. A simple black card, heavier than it looked, with a name embossed in silver that caught the light. Sebastian Wolf. I stared at it, the letters unfamiliar, and yet somehow important, like they carried weight I had not yet felt. "From now on," he said, his voice still calm, still controlled, "you do not have to do this alone." And for the first time since he walked in, I realized this was not the end of something small. It was the beginning of something I was not ready to understand. I did not touch the card for a full 5 seconds. It just sat there on the counter like it did not belong to my world, like it had been dropped into the wrong story by mistake. The name on it felt heavier the longer I looked at it, like it carried meaning I had not earned the right to understand. Sebastian Wolf. I had never heard it before, but something in the way the old couple watched me told me I should have. "I think you have the wrong idea," I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be, because the truth was I did not even know what the right idea was anymore. He did not move, did not react the way people usually do when you push back, just stood there with that same stillness, like he had already considered every possible answer I could give. "I do not make assumptions," he said, and there was no arrogance in it, just certainty, the kind that made you question your own thoughts. Behind him, the old woman smiled again, softer this time, like she was watching something unfold exactly the way she expected. I picked up the card before I could stop myself, the edge cool against my fingers, the surface smooth and unfamiliar. "I do not need help," I added, even though the words felt thin, like they might break if I pressed on them too hard. He noticed, of course he did, the way my grip tightened, the way my shoulders squared like I was trying to hold something together. "You needed it every night," he said, not unkindly, just stating something that felt too close to the truth. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because how do you deny something you have been living? The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just real, and for the first time, I realized he was not here to take anything from me. He was here because of them. "Why did you do it?" he asked, and this time it was a question. I glanced past him, to the booth by the window, to the plates that were almost empty now, to the two people who had become part of my nights without me even noticing when it happened, because they needed it. I said simply, because anything more would have sounded like I was trying to explain something that did not need explaining. His eyes held mine for a moment longer, and something shifted, small but real, like a decision being made somewhere behind that controlled expression. "And if they did not?" he asked. I frowned, not understanding. "If they were not who you thought they were," he continued, his voice steady, "would you have done it anyway?" The question landed differently than the others, heavier, like it was testing something deeper than my actions. I did not have to think about it. "Yes," I said, because that had never been the part that mattered. For a second, just a second, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like one. Behind him, the old man let out a quiet breath, like he had been holding it this entire time. Then, "You understand something most people do not," Sebastian said, and there was something quieter in his voice now, something less guarded. I set the card back down, not pushing it away, just placing it between us like a line I was not ready to cross. "I still do not know who you are," I admitted, because pretending I did felt impossible now. He followed my gaze to the card, then back to me. "You will," he said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a promise I did not know how to accept. Outside, through the diner window, I noticed the black car again, parked in the same spot, engine still running, like it had been there all along. I felt something shift inside me, something small but undeniable, like the world I had been holding together with routines and small kindnesses was starting to stretch in ways I could not control. "Lily," the old woman called gently, her voice warm, familiar, grounding me for just a second. I turned toward her, grateful for the sound of my own name. In a way I could not explain. "You should go home," she said, her eyes kind but knowing, like she understood more than she was saying. I nodded slowly, even though I was not sure what going home meant anymore. When I looked back, Sebastian was already stepping away, his attention returning to them, but not before his eyes found mine one last time, steady, certain, like he had just placed something in my life that would not disappear when I walked out that door. And for the first time since I started those late-night walks, I realized this was no longer just about survival. Something had found me, and it was not going to let me stay invisible. I left the diner with the card still in my pocket, its weight unfamiliar, like carrying something that did not belong to me but refused to be left behind. The night air hit colder than usual, sharp against my skin, and for a moment I just stood there on the sidewalk, staring at my reflection in the dark window, trying to recognize the girl looking back. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. The street was quiet, too quiet for a city that never really slept, and across the road, that same black car idled like it had been waiting, like it knew I would step out eventually. I told myself it was nothing, just coincidence, just my mind trying to connect things that did not belong together, but my feet slowed anyway as I walked past it, my heart beat louder than the distant hum of traffic. I did not look directly, but I felt it, that subtle awareness of being noticed, not in a way that made me panic, but in a way that made me careful. I kept walking, counting steps the way I always did when I needed control. 1 block, 2 blocks, the familiar rhythm of my route grounding me, reminding me that I still knew this part of my life. By the time I reached my building, the card was still there in my pocket, untouched, but no longer ignorable. My apartment smelled faintly of detergent and something stale, the kind of place that held on to the day because it had nothing else to offer. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood there for a second too long, like I was waiting for something else to happen, for the night to continue unfolding in a way I could not predict. But nothing did. Just silence, just the hum of the refrigerator, just me. I pulled the card out slowly, turning it between my fingers under the weak kitchen light, the name catching the glow in a way that made it look permanent, like it had always existed in my life even though it had not. Sebastian Wolf. I said it quietly, testing how it sounded, how it felt. It did not belong to my world, but somehow, it had found its way into it anyway. I set it on the counter, stepped back, then stepped forward again, like distance might change what it meant. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from my manager reminding me about tomorrow's shift, the usual routine pulling at me, trying to anchor me back into something familiar. I stared at the screen, then at the card, then back again, caught between two versions of the same life. One predictable, one not. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way he had looked at me, not like someone passing through, but like someone who had already decided something about me, without asking. And I did not know if that was something to be afraid of or something to hold on to. Morning came too fast, pale light slipping through the thin curtains, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream, just another strange night layered on top of too many others. But the card was still there, exactly where I had left it, quiet and waiting. I picked it up again, this time not hesitating, not questioning, just holding it long enough to feel the weight of what it might mean. Outside, the city moved on like it always did, people rushing, cars passing, nothing stopping for one girl standing in a small apartment trying to decide what to do next. I slipped the card into my bag without fully deciding why, just knowing that leaving it behind felt wrong. And as I stepped out into the day, into the same streets that had never asked anything from me before, I realized something had shifted in a way I could not undo. Because for the first time, I was not just walking toward another shift, another night, another routine. I was walking with a choice I did not understand, one that felt quiet but powerful, like a door had been left open somewhere behind me, and no matter how far I went, I would always know it was there. I tried to ignore it. That was the plan. Keep moving, keep working, keep everything small and manageable the way it had always been. The club lights felt harsher that night, the music louder, like it was trying to drown out the thoughts I could not quite silence. I moved the same way I always did, step, turn, smile, repeat, but something inside me was off rhythm, like I was half a beat behind my own life. Every time I reached into my bag between sets, I felt the edge of the card, smooth and solid, a quiet reminder that something had changed even if nothing around me had. "You look distracted," Jenna said, leaning against the mirror beside me, adjusting her lipstick with practiced ease. I shook my head, forcing a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. "Just tired," I said, because that was always believable. She studied me for a second longer, then shrugged, already moving on, because in places like this, everyone learns not to look too closely. When my shift ended, I did not hesitate the way I thought I might. My feet carried me out into the night, down the same 3 blocks, past the same flickering streetlight, toward the diner that had become more than just a stop in my routine. But something was different before I even reached the door. The street was too still, too quiet in a way that felt intentional, and the black car was there again. Closer this time, parked directly across from the entrance like it belonged. I slowed, just slightly, enough to notice the driver this time. A silhouette behind tinted glass, still, watchful, not threatening, not obvious, just present in a way that made it impossible to pretend it meant nothing. I pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly, and stepped inside. The smell of coffee and grease wrapped around me. Familiar, grounding, but the atmosphere felt different, like the room was holding its breath. The booth by the window was occupied, but not the way it used to be. The old couple sat as they always did, but there was something in their posture, something more composed, more certain, and at the head of the table, he was already there, Sebastian Wolf. He did not look up right away, just continued whatever quiet conversation they had been having, his presence filling the space without effort. I stood there for a second too long, caught between stepping forward and turning around, but the old woman saw me first. Her face lit up, in a way that made everything else fade for a moment. "Lily," she said warmly, like nothing had changed, like this was still just a simple routine. I walked over slowly, setting the paper bag on the table the way I always did, my hands steady even if my thoughts were not. "You did not have to bring anything tonight," the old man said, but there was no real protest in his voice, just something softer, something almost proud. "I wanted to," I replied, because that part was still true, even now. Sebastian's gaze lifted then, meeting mine with that same calm intensity, like he had been expecting me to walk in at this exact moment. "You came back," he said, not surprised, just acknowledging something already decided. I frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. "They were still going to be here," I answered, nodding toward the couple, as if that explained everything. For a moment, he just watched me, and then something shifted again, subtle but real, like another piece of a puzzle falling into place. "Sit," the old woman said gently, patting the seat across from her, the one that had always been empty. I hesitated, just for a second, because sitting meant staying, meant stepping further into something I did not understand. But then I pulled out the chair anyway. The sound soft against the floor and lowered myself into it. The table felt different from this side, like I had crossed an invisible line without realizing it. The old man poured coffee into a clean cup and slid it toward me, his hands steady, his movements precise. "You should not always stand," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I wrapped my fingers around the cup, the warmth grounding me. But my attention kept drifting back to Sebastian, to the way he observed everything without seeming to try. "You always do this," he said after a moment, his voice quiet but clear. "Give without asking what it costs you." I held his gaze this time, not looking away. "Not everything has to be a transaction," I replied, and for the first time, something in his expression changed in a way I could not quite name. Not surprise, not disbelief, but recognition. Outside, through the window, the black car remained, unmoving, patient, and as I sat there between the life I knew and the one unfolding in front of me, I realized I was no longer just passing through this place. I was part of something now, whether I understood it or not, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice told me this was only the beginning of what that would mean. The coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I did not notice until the old woman gently pushed a fresh cup toward me, her fingers brushing mine with a softness that felt deliberate, grounding. I blinked, realizing I had been staring at nothing, lost somewhere between what my life used to be and what it was quietly becoming. "You are thinking too much," she said with a small smile, like she could see straight through me, and maybe she could. I let out a breath I did not realize. I had been holding and wrapped my hands around the new cup, the warmth pulling me back into the moment. Across from me, Sebastian had not moved much, but his presence filled the space in a way that made everything else feel secondary, like the diner itself was just a backdrop to something larger unfolding. "She always does that," the old man added, nodding toward me, his tone light, but his eyes sharp, observant in a way I had missed before. "Gives more than she should and pretends it costs her." "Nothing." I shook my head slightly, a reflex more than a denial, because arguing felt pointless. "It is not like that," I said quietly, though I was not entirely sure what it was like anymore. Sebastian leaned back just enough to study me more clearly, his gaze steady, not invasive, just present in a way that made it impossible to ignore. "Then tell me what it is like," he said, his voice calm, almost curious. The question settled between us, heavier than it should have been, because answering meant putting something into words I had always left unspoken. I glanced down at the table, at the simple plates, the worn edges, the small details that had always made this place feel safe. "It is easier," I said after a moment, choosing honesty over anything else, to help someone else than to think about what you cannot fix in your own life. The words came out softer than I expected, but they felt right, like something I had been carrying without realizing it. The old woman's expression shifted, something tender and understanding passing through her eyes, while the old man gave a slow nod, like he had heard something important. Sebastian did not respond immediately, but I saw it again, that subtle change, that quiet recalculation behind his eyes. "And if someone offered to fix it," he asked, "would you let them?" I looked up then, meeting his gaze fully, because this was not a casual question, and we both knew it. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what they expect in return." The corner of his mouth moved again, that almost smile that never fully formed. "Not everything has a price," he replied, and for a second, I almost believed him. Silence settled over the table, not uncomfortable, just full, like something important had been said without being fully understood. Yet, outside, the black car was still there, steady and patient, a quiet reminder that whatever this was, it extended beyond the walls of this diner. The old woman reached across the table then, placing her hand gently over mine, her touch warm, reassuring. "You have already given more than enough," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I swallowed, unsure how to respond, because I had never thought of it that way, never framed my actions as something significant. To me, it had always been simple, but nothing about this felt simple anymore. Sebastian's gaze followed the movement of her hand, then returned to me, more focused now, more certain. "From this moment on," he said, his tone still calm, but carrying something firmer underneath, "you are not invisible anymore." The words landed differently than I expected, not like a warning, not like a threat, but like a shift I could not undo. I felt it then, deep and undeniable, that quiet line I had crossed the moment I chose to sit at this table. I was no longer just the girl who passed through unnoticed, who gave quietly and left without a trace. Something had changed, something irreversible, and even if I stood up and walked away right now, I knew it would follow me. Because the truth was no longer something I could ignore. I had been seen, truly seen, and whatever came next, it would not let me go back to who I was before. I did not realize how much those words stayed with me until I tried to go back to normal. The next morning felt too quiet, like the city had lowered its voice just enough for me to notice things I had always ignored. I walked the same streets, passed the same storefronts, nodded at the same faces, but everything felt slightly out of place, like I was seeing it from a different angle. At work, the music sounded louder, the lights harsher, and for the first time, I noticed how people looked at me. Not just passing glances, but lingering ones, like they were trying to figure something out. Or maybe it was just me, overthinking again, trying to make sense of something I could not fully explain. I moved through my shift on autopilot, counting steps, keeping rhythm, smiling when I needed to. But my focus kept drifting, pulled back to that table, to that moment when everything had shifted without warning. "You are somewhere else tonight," Jenna said again, her voice cutting through the noise as she leaned against the mirror, arms crossed. I hesitated, then gave a small shrug, because explaining felt impossible. "Just tired," I repeated, though even I did not believe it anymore. She studied me for a second longer than usual, then shook her head slightly, like she knew I was not telling the full truth, but chose not to push. When my shift ended, I did not rush out like I usually did. I lingered for a moment, standing near the exit, watching the street through the glass door. The black car was there again. Same spot, same quiet presence, like it had become part of the night itself. This time, I did not pretend it was coincidence. I stepped outside slowly, the cool air wrapping around me, and for the first time, I looked directly at it. The driver did not move, did not react, just sat there like he had all the time in the world. I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not exactly, but awareness, the kind that changes the way you carry yourself without you realizing it. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking, my steps steady even if my thoughts were not. The distance between me and the diner felt shorter that night, like the path had been pulled tighter, more direct. When I pushed the door open, the bell chimed the same way it always did, but the room felt different again, like it had been waiting. They were already there, all three of them, the same arrangement as before, but now it felt intentional, like a pattern I was starting to recognize. The old woman smiled as soon as she saw me, warm and familiar, and for a second, everything felt normal again. "You came," she said softly, as if there had ever been a question. "Of course," I replied, setting the paper bag down, because that part had never changed. The old man gave me a small nod, his expression thoughtful, like he was observing something I had not noticed yet. Sebastian was watching me again, that same calm focus, but this time there was something else in it, something more certain, less questioning. "You saw the car," he said, not as a question. I paused, my hand still resting on the edge of the table. "Yes," I admitted, because there was no point pretending anymore. He nodded slightly, like that confirmed something for him. "It is there for you," he said simply. The words settled in slowly, heavier than they should have been. "For me," I repeated, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "To make sure you get home safely," he clarified, his tone even, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I let out a small breath, something between disbelief and something I could not name. "You do not have to do that," I said, because that felt like the only response I knew. He held my gaze, unshaken. "I already did," he replied. The simplicity of it caught me off guard, like the decision had been made long before I had any say in it. I glanced toward the window, where the outline of the car was still visible, steady and patient. Something about it felt less distant now, less like an unknown presence, and more like a quiet extension of the man sitting across from me. I looked back at him, searching for something, some explanation that would make this easier to understand. Why? I asked finally, because it was the only question that mattered. For a moment, he said nothing, and in that silence, I felt the weight of everything that had led to this point. Then his gaze softened, just slightly, enough to change the way the air between us felt. "Because you chose them," he said, quietly, when no one was watching. The words landed deeper than I expected, settling somewhere I could not easily ignore. And in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding. This was not about obligation, not about repayment, not about anything simple. This was something else entirely, something that had already begun to reshape the edges of my life, whether I was ready for it or not. The words stayed with me long after they were spoken, echoing in the quiet spaces between everything else, because they were too simple to ignore and too heavy to forget. I finished my coffee slower than usual, not because I wanted to stay, but because leaving felt like stepping out of something unfinished. The old woman watched me with that same gentle understanding, her eyes warm in a way that made it impossible to pretend this was still just a routine. "You think too far ahead," she said softly, her hand brushing mine again, steady and reassuring. I gave a small smile, but it did not quite hold, because for the first time, I was not thinking ahead, I was thinking about right now, about what had already changed. Sebastian stood before I did, his movements smooth, controlled, like everything he did had already been decided. Before it happened, "It is late," he said, his tone calm but final, not a suggestion, not a request. I nodded, pushing my chair back slowly, aware of the way the moment was closing around me. "I will see you tomorrow," the old man said, not asking, just stating it like a certainty. I hesitated for half a second, then nodded again, because somehow that felt right. Outside, the night air felt different, not colder, just clearer, like something had shifted in the way I noticed things. The black car was still there, exactly where it had been. Engine quiet now, lights dimmed, waiting without pressure. I paused on the sidewalk, my hand tightening slightly on my bag strap, because stepping toward it felt like stepping into something I had not agreed to yet. "You can ignore it." Sebastian's voice came from behind me, closer than I expected, steady and unhurried. I turned, finding him just a few steps away, his presence as constant as the night itself. "It will still follow," he added, not as a warning, but as a truth. I exhaled slowly, looking back at the car, then at him, caught between instinct and something else I could not name. "I do not like feeling watched," I said, because honesty felt easier now than pretending. His gaze softened slightly, not in a way that removed the weight of it, but in a way that acknowledged what I had said. "You are not being watched," he replied. "You are being protected." The distinction felt small, but it changed something in me, just enough to make me consider it differently. I studied him for a moment, searching for anything that felt uncertain, anything that might make this easier to dismiss. But there was nothing, just that same calm certainty that made arguing feel pointless. "I did not ask for this," I said, quietly, because that part still mattered. He nodded once, like he expected that. "No," he agreed. "You did not." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything neither of us said. I looked down at the pavement, at the faint reflection of the streetlights, trying to find something familiar to hold on to. "And if I say no?" I asked, lifting my gaze back to him. "If I say I do not want any of this?" He held my eyes, steady, unwavering, but not forcing. "Then you say no," he answered, simple, direct. The answer surprised me more than anything else, because it left the choice exactly where it had been all along, with me. I glanced at the car again, then back at him, feeling that quiet shift inside me, the one that had been growing since the moment I first sat at that table. "And if I say yes?" I continued, my voice softer now, less certain. For the first time, there was a pause, brief but real, like even he respected the weight of that question. "Then you do not walk alone anymore," he said finally. The words settled into me slowly, not overwhelming, not demanding, just present in a way that made them impossible to ignore. I looked at the car one last time, then took a step forward, not because I had fully decided, but because standing still felt like the wrong choice now. The driver stepped out immediately, opening the door without a word, his movements precise, respectful. I hesitated only for a second before getting in, the seats softer than anything I was used to, the interior quiet, controlled, like a different world contained in a small space. As the door closed and the car began to move, I glanced out the window, watching the diner fade behind me, the place where everything had started to change. And for the first time, I realized I was not just being taken somewhere new. I was leaving something behind, something familiar, something safe. And as the city lights blurred past, I could not tell if I had made a choice, or if the choice had been waiting for me all along. The car moved smoothly through the city, quieter than anything I had ever been inside. Like even the noise of the outside world had been filtered out before it could reach me. I sat still, hands resting in my lap, watching the reflections of streetlights slide across the window like passing thoughts I could not quite hold on to. For a moment, I forgot where I was going, forgot why I had stepped into this car in the first place, and just focused on the feeling of not being alone in the way I used to be. The driver said nothing, did not look back, did not acknowledge me beyond the simple act of opening the door earlier, and somehow that silence felt respectful, rather than distant. I glanced down at my hands, at the faint marks from the night, the small reminders of the life I had been living until just hours ago, and wondered how something so ordinary could already feel like it belonged to someone else. When the car slowed, I looked up, expecting the familiar outline of my building, the cracked steps, the flickering hallway light, but instead I saw something different. Clean lines, quiet surroundings, a place that felt removed from the noise and rush of everything I knew. The car came to a stop, and for a second, I did not move, because stepping out felt like crossing another line I could not undo. The door opened before I could decide, the same precise movement as before, and I stepped out slowly, my feet adjusting to ground that felt unfamiliar in a way I could not explain. "This is not my place," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else, because it was the only thought that made sense. "Not anymore." His voice came from behind me, steady, certain, like he had been there the entire time, even though I had not seen him arrive. I turned, finding Sebastian standing a few steps away, his presence as composed as ever, like he existed exactly where he intended to be. I did not agree to this, I added, the words coming out sharper than I expected, because this felt too big, too fast, too far from what I understood. He did not react the way most people would, did not step closer or raise his voice, just held my gaze with that same calm certainty. "You agreed to stop struggling alone," he said, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard again. I frowned slightly, trying to find the right way to push back, to draw a line that made sense, but the truth was I did not know where that line was anymore. "That does not mean I leave everything behind," I said, my voice quieter now, because this was not just about a place, it was about everything that came with it. For the first time, he paused, not long, but enough to show that he was considering something beyond his own perspective. "Then you do not leave it," he replied, his tone unchanged, but the meaning shifting just enough to matter. I blinked, caught off guard by the answer, because it was not what I expected. "You think this is about taking something from you," he continued, his voice lower now, less distant. "But it is about making sure nothing takes from you again." The words settled differently than anything else he had said, not overwhelming, not forceful, just clear in a way that made them hard to ignore. I looked around again, at the quiet building, at the absence of noise, at the space that felt too open compared to the life I was used to, and for a moment, I felt that familiar hesitation rise again. But it was not fear this time. It was something else, something closer to understanding that change does not always announce itself in ways you can prepare for. Sometimes it just arrives, quiet and certain, and waits for you to decide what to do with it. I took a small step forward, not fully committing, not fully resisting, just moving enough to acknowledge that I was no longer standing where I started. Sebastian watched me, not guiding, not pushing, just present in a way that made the choice feel like it was truly mine. And as I stood there between the life I had known and the one opening in front of me, I realized something that felt both simple and impossible at the same time. I had spent so long surviving that I had never stopped to consider what it might feel like to be protected, to be seen, to be chosen without having to earn it. And as the door in front of me opened quietly, without urgency, without pressure, I understood that this was not the end of my story, not even close. It was just the moment where everything I thought I knew began to change, and whether I stepped forward or turned back, I would never be the same girl who danced every night just to make it through.